Hello and welcome to The Game Changers. I'm Sue Anstis and this is the podcast where you'll hear from trailblazers in women's sport who are quite literally knocking down the barriers to challenge the status quo for women and girls across society. A massive thank you to our partners Sport England who are kindly supporting The Game Changers through a National Lottery Award. My guest today is Tammy Parlour, the co-founder and CEO of the Women's Sport Trust. Tammy works with leaders across sport, media and business to understand how to practically raise visibility, increase impact and create a stronger women's sport ecosystem. Tammy is a master in the Korean martial art of Hapkido, having practiced for 40 years. She set up her own Hapkido and meditation school in the early 90s and still coaches regularly. Tammy holds an MSc in strength and conditioning and has undertaken postgraduate study into applied sports psychology. Along with her role leading the Women's Sport Trust, Tammy also volunteers as a board director for AFC Wimbledon Ladies. And in 2019, Tammy was awarded an MBE in the New Year's Honours for her services to gender equality in sport. So Tammy, the Women's Sport Trust is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, and I'm incredibly proud to have been a trustee with you throughout that time. But I wonder if that's something you ever imagined when you first thought about creating the charity back in 2012.
So I can't believe it's been a decade. I really can't. It's gone so fast. No, I don't know what I expected back in 2012. It was at the time just wanted to stay involved in sport and to make a difference, to give something back. And it was just very focused on the moment. I don't think I ever envisaged what WST has become.
You talk about that focusing on the moment. So what was that moment? What kind of drove you to create it in the first place?
Oh my gosh, I'm totally inspired by London 2012. And, you mentioned that I've, in the intro, that I've been doing martial arts for 40 years. Sport in that way has been a massive part of my life. And I just kept my head down and sort of did my thing in my sport. And London 2012 came along and it totally blindsided me. I realised that I had not been privy to women's sport. Even as a female athlete, I hadn't seen other female athletes like me. And everywhere there were strong, athletic, tall women. And being a sportswoman felt more accepted in society. And I found myself standing taller. I found my self-worth sort of increasing. And I suddenly realized that I hadn't been seeing these things. And once you realize the absence, you can't sort of unsee that anymore. And at the same time, there were all these stories around female athletes struggling financially. And there was one story in particular of someone having a flat tire and, didn't have the money to get the tire fixed. And I thought, well, I've got a tenner, and if I can find 10 other people, then we've got 100 quid and we could buy her a new tire. That was the sort of motivation behind it, recognizing that it had changed me inside, it had motivated me, it had made me feel more confident and have a greater self-worth as a sportswoman. The absence and then the realizing that I could do something practical to stay involved and to help. So WST originally started, as you know, as a grant-giving body designed to help sportswomen in whatever way they needed. It's changed a lot since then.
We could have been all replacing tyres and quick fitting if it hadn't been the case. A whole different path. I wonder, what was the initial response like from the industry at the time? And again, it's almost like casting your mind back 10 years, but as you kind of came out into that space.
Yeah, it was so different to what it is now. Women's sport was very much seen as this. Well, it wasn't seen. It was seen as something worthy. And that was a big strapline that we had sort of internally back then, was trying to move from worthy to irresistible. And, it was seen as the right thing to do, but there wasn't really much focus on it at all. So it was very easy to get to incredible leaders within sport and amazing athletes. The first people that we spoke to was the Tanny Gray-Thompson and Liz Nichol, who was then the CEO of UK Sport. These people that, would be much harder to get in touch with now. And I look back at our first patron, Anna Watkins, remember being in a car park away for the weekend, and Anna had written some sort of little blurb within, I think it was the Sunday Times, and just on a whim sort of tweeted her and said, "Seen your thing in the Sunday Times, setting up a charity. Would you meet for coffee?" And she said yes. And it was sort of, that sort of stuff I don't think would happen these days. It was just, I suppose, right time, right place. People had an appetite for it because of London 2012. And then I think when we came in, we started to look at things a bit differently. Yeah, and it moved from there.
It's flourished from there. I'm going to come back to talk more about the Women's Sport Trust, but I'd like to explore a little bit of your own sporting backgrounds. We kind of alluded to it in the introduction, but can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Okay, so I've done one of the martial arts, a martial art called Hapkido, for 40 years now. I always say martial art rather than Hapkido because no one's ever heard of Hapkido.
We can learn about it now. We can learn about it now.
You can learn about it, absolutely. It is a Korean martial art that is more about self-defense and personal development rather than competition. So it doesn't have tournaments, it doesn't have competitions within it. It has the kicks and the punches that you would find in taekwondo, karate, but also pressure point, joint manipulation, weapon techniques, free fighting, meditation. It's got this sort of the whole package. I started when I was, 11, 12, 13, sort of around about that kind of age. We'd moved to America, so I am British, but my family relocated to the States when I was 11. And I just woke up one day and decided I wanted to do karate. I don't know where that came from. I really don't. This was pre-Karate Kid and all that sort of stuff. So I have no idea why I suddenly decided that I wanted to do it. At that time, there was a Korean grandmaster who had a school that was about a 20-minute drive from where we lived. Went to meet him and signed up that day and have been his student ever since. He's he was the son of a Buddhist monk, so his teaching as well as being sort of the physical side, was very much around Buddhism, Taoism. So for me, it stimulated both that physical side, so interesting and so complete, the system, but it also had that sort of intellectual and philosophical side as well. So it hit my being at so many different levels. And then I just kept going. I suppose I never realised that I had a choice to stop at any point, because there were points that through the past 40 years, that I definitely battled with motivation or didn't want to do it or things, but I never gave myself an option to stop. I just kept doing it. And I'm really pleased that I did. Yeah, 40 years later, I now have a school that I teach at still regularly in London. And it's good stuff.
And you said it wasn't competitive in terms of tournaments, but I guess in terms of that qualification and how you progress. So where are you now on that journey?
Well, so yes, it's not competitive against others. So we don't sort of go into the ring and beat each other up, but there are sort of standards and things that you meet along the way. So I am master level of Hapkido, a 5th degree black belt, and She says not knowing what else to say.
I had someone to pull that out of you.
Okay. If I was being less humble, but yes, there aren't many women of my level in the world, really. So
there you go. I pulled it out of you, Tammy. I'm trying to get you to. I think I met you. You might have been at the 4th level when I met you. So you've progressed even in that time.
The traditional ones, they do take a long time to sort of progress. So you're talking decades. When you get to a particular level, there are decades in between one level of black belt to another level of black belt. So, yeah.
Wow. You mentioned in terms of not really having seen or been as aware of that gender disparity across sport perhaps until 2012. So in terms of Hapkido, are women very much seen as equals? Was there gender balance within that martial art?
I was totally oblivious to it growing up. I really was. If I look back, I would say I was very regularly the only female in classes or sessions and things. There was one other woman who I occasionally saw who was the sister of one of the high black belts. But apart from that, it was me. And I was also probably the youngest. I was training with men who were sort of at least 15, 20 years older than me. And I I was oblivious. I would say that fighting arts tend to attract more men, definitely. And within my school, I've got more men than women. But as a female instructor, I think I naturally do attract more women in. So my split is probably 65% men, I'd say. I would guess that that's a high level of women within my school as opposed to others.
And how much of that mental strength that you found within Hapkido, you talked about the mental side of it, led you to be that interest in sports psychology and the mind generally?
From a very young age, all I said I wanted to do was teach. I wanted to become a Hapkido master and teach martial arts. That was my dream. I had no idea how that would ever pan out. I'm talking at about age 15. That's what I wanted to do.
Wow.
So I had this, and I have a strong drive for learning as well. So I just wanted to keep learning about how the body worked, how the mind worked, how I could teach better. And that's really what pushed me to do the Masters in Strength and Conditioning as well, was I had been trained for so long by a Korean grandmaster who was big on the whole Eastern psychology and Eastern philosophy and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, I need to learn from the Western side as well. And I wanted to understand more about body mechanics and physiology and that sort of thing. And the purpose behind that was not to become a strength and conditioning coach. It was to understand things better, to become a better martial arts instructor.
And you say having that drive from age 15, has it met your expectations? Have you loved teaching as much as you thought you would do?
Oh my gosh, yes. Teaching Hapkido is just wonderful. Seeing people's growing confidence, seeing people learn, seeing people try things that they're nervous about but desperately want to do is just the most amazing thing. Being part of someone's journey to fulfill their potential. Gosh, I don't know whether that sounds really dodgy, but I really do. I suppose for me, life is about, we're all incredible human beings, but there are so many barriers that stop us from actually being as incredible as we could be. And I see my role as a Hapkido master, or a martial arts instructor, is to enable people to be the best version of themselves. So that's a privilege to be part of that. So it's definitely a wonderful thing.
And do you ever see a point when Hapkido won't be a part of your life?
Oh dear. I don't know. A few years ago, I had a hip replacement, which means I can't do all the physical things that I once was able to. I can still do an awful lot, but I can't kick at the same height, or my jumping and spinning kicks and things aren't as good as they once were. The pandemic has hit most grassroots clubs very hard. And, when I remember when meeting you back in 2012, Sue, I had about 100 sort of members and students sort of in the school as I started WST, and my focus went a little bit elsewhere. It reduced down. And now through the pandemic as well, it's a much smaller club than it ever was. And I wondered whether, is this the time? Am I getting a sign that I need to stop? But then I go to the classes. And the club is just such a wonderful, welcoming community. And I always come away feeling so much better, so much more balanced. And it's just a wonderful thing to be part of a sports community.
I guess coming out of COVID, now more than ever, that community and that people valuing it and wanting to feel part of something.
Yes, yeah, very much so. Very much so.
I'd like to chat a little bit more about your career. And you worked for the Prince's Trust before you started the Women's Sport Trust. So can you tell me a little bit about your role there?
Gosh, Prince's Trust, that's a long time ago. I worked for them for about 8 years. And I suppose I would say that Prince's Trust was my first proper job. I started off as a team leader, which was running programs, 3-month programs for young people between the age of 16 and 25. We recruited a whole diverse team, so about 15 young people, and the program involved doing community projects together, where they would have to beg, borrow, and steal all the equipment and things to get to I don't know, build a play area or whatever the community needed. They did placements. We volunteered at a holiday home for people with disabilities. We did all sorts of things, and that was all about helping people fulfill their potential, helping young people sort of understand their worth and help move them forward within their life, really.
Lovely. Clearly, as we've alluded to, the Women's Sport Trust has really evolved over the past decade. And I'd like to explore how the ambitions and the activity have changed to suit the needs of the sector. So you did mention this briefly before, but what were the key issues that you saw in sport back in 2012? It's hard to think it's 10 years ago, but things have changed so much, haven't they?
Yes, very much so. So I said that we started off as a grant-giving body, but it became clear very early on that actually giving that £100 to a athlete to buy a new tyre or whatever wouldn't really change anything sort of within the system. So the more we talked to people, the more we realised that actually we needed a different approach. And you were there too, Sue. We talked amongst the board about sort of where our strengths and weaknesses were, where the gaps were within the landscape. And our focus was more, and our interest was more around three sort of pillars. Role models. So we started to focus on elite athlete media coverage, and then also the money side, funding landscape. And a lot at the start was about trying to pull all the people together from those three different areas. Because when we talk to people, everyone seemed to be pointing the finger at each other. The sports saying, well, people aren't investing it enough. The investors saying, well, there's not enough media coverage saying, well, no one's, everybody was pointing at each other. And there was this belief that women's sport was at this sort of low kind of level as well. So we started to do things that move people, that they're thinking from worthy to irresistible, and we started pulling everybody in the room together. So we would get all these different groups together, stimulate them, ask them to look at things a little differently, put across a more irresistible picture of women's sport, and then push them back out into the real world again and hope sort of that change kind of happened. And initially we started doing a lot around awards. So we ran something called the Big Game Changer Awards for about 4 years, which was all about trying to celebrate what was happening out there, but not just celebrate it, also use those events as a tool in order to stimulate different sectors and to get people to think about women's sport differently. So we did that for about 4 years. By the end of 4 years, we recognised that it wasn't having the same effect that it did at the start, because the whole landscape had started to develop. Other awards were popping up, and we're a tiny little organisation, and we weren't getting the same impact that we were previously. So we did something quite controversial, and that is we decided to stop them. And there were a lot of people that thought we were crazy, because when you thought about what the Women's Sport Trust was, people would say, oh, they do the awards. I mean, that's what we were known for. And suddenly we were stopping this thing that we were known for. But if it's not hitting what you're trying to change, then what's the point of doing it? Then it just becomes an ego exercise. So we stopped doing the awards and we started focusing more on the athletes and the Unlocked programme. I'm sure you want to touch on a little bit. And that's really been our sort of the way we've developed as an organisation. We've got a bit of a kind of rebel spirit about us. We look at things sideways. We question traditional thinking, and we change, we adapt with the times. And we tend to try and understand what's needed. Let's stay a little bit ahead and then shift our focus. And then when other people are starting to pay attention to that, then shift our focus forward. So we're always trying to push the industry forward a little bit.
Talking to you reminds me why I love the Women's Sport Trust. It's fantastic. We do talk of the Women's Sport Trust as being the provocative glue of the sports sector, but what would you say has been some of the most challenging elements of driving that change as you look back?
Oh my gosh, I think the whole thing is challenging. That's the thing when you decide, gosh, I want to set up a charity. Well, even just, charity status took a couple of goes. You go back to, it made so many errors along the way, but it's all again, going back to fit with my martial arts, never gave myself a choice of whether something could work or not. You just keep at it, don't you? So what have been the biggest challenge, or what hasn't been a challenge, Sue? I mean, everything from always trying to understand what the next thing is to focus on and to really sort of hone down strategy, to funding. Funding is a massive thing, both within women's sport, but also for us in the organisation as well. I think a lot of people, I think we're hugely valued within the industry, but who's then willing to put their hand in their pocket to pay for that is a different thing. So raising money has been a massive challenge. Sport England funders currently, and I'm so grateful for their amazing support and belief in us as an organisation. And I think without their support, we definitely wouldn't be where we are today.
And in terms of the approach of the Women's Sport Trust, how do you personally maintain that balance of calling people out and yet also keeping people on board? Because that is a tricky path to tread sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We've always been focused on the positive, I suppose, as an organisation. We tend to monitor what's happening, use that to influence the system, educate the system and support people. We tend to focus on opportunities that are being missed, rather than say, if someone berates you, do you really want to change? I don't think so. Nobody wants to be told how awful they're doing. But if someone says to me, oh my gosh, you're missing this amazing opportunity, then I think, oh gosh, that sounds interesting. So that's really the approach that we've been taking. I have a strong belief that actually people want to do the right thing and people want to do a really good job. But sometimes we don't necessarily know how to do the thing we want to do. How can we give more money if we don't have more money? Well, let's talk about how we can get more money and how you redo your budgets, or all that sort of stuff. So it's trying to show there's an opportunity being missed and also help people make the changes they need in order to do what we know they want to do.
I'm nodding. I'm vigorously nodding here. It's a podcast, but I'm nodding. Can I talk more specifically about some of the work that you've done? So the ambition report, can you talk to me a little bit about that and how the industry was involved in its creation too?
Yeah. So the ambition report came out of the pandemic, really. So we'd gone, we can think, gosh, how many years ago was that?
I know, it feels like such a long time ago.
Yes, I don't know whether it was a decade ago or whether it was yesterday. Time has just totally distorted itself, hasn't it? So the pandemic hit and there was loads of talk around women's sport going to the dark ages. And it really didn't like how it was being reported in that way. As an organisation that likes to see opportunity, it was sort of totally, you're creating this image that really don't believe in. So recognised that we needed to do something. What we ended up doing was pulling together the whole sort of sporting ecosystem, really, to come together to discuss what their ambitions were around women's sport, and what the barriers were and what actions they thought needed to be taken. So I think it was about 40 or 50 leaders across the industry, from sport funders, DCMS, UK Sport, Sport England, so forth, to rights holders, NGBs, athletes, digital platforms, broadcasters, all sorts, all at that sort of leadership level. We pulled them together each within sort of their independent groups to get them really to talk about their ambitions and barriers and so forth. And then all of that was put into a summarised paper with key points that was then given back to everybody to take in. And then we brought them all back together again to react to what they'd read. And then out of that, then more notes were drawn up out of the reactions. And from that, the ambition report was created, which really was around almost a blueprint for the industry. And no matter where you were in the industry, in order to progress women's sport, this is what women's sport, the leadership of the sporting ecosystem, it says, believes need to happen. And within those came out of it were things like the need for data, the growth of visibility, professionalising the area, collaboration. One of the key things that came out was the need to diversify the industry. that the industry is too white and male, and that needs to change, and a lot of things will roll off of the back of that. So I believe there are 8 key points, and it's a fantastic insight into what the sports leadership believes, where they want to go, and areas to focus on when others are writing strategy.
And what impact have you seen from the Ambition Report?
Well, initially it got amazing feedback from, and global feedback from all sorts of places, from the gender equality units and Olympic committees to UN, to, all sorts across. I think understanding impact, or tracking impact, is rather a challenging thing. I know it's been used to influence programs that educational type organisations are putting out. I know it's been used by a few NGBs as far as creating strategies and so forth. I need to get better at some about detailing impact and things. And I think that's something that is challenging for us as an organisation anyway. When you're focused on trying to change people's thinking, to stimulate, to be a catalyst for people making decisions and all that sort of stuff, it's difficult to actually follow that impact from a conversation here. You know in your heart that it made whatever impact, but actually documenting that and so forth is a challenging thing.
No, I completely agree. And actually looking back at it, like reminding myself of those key points, and you can see the shift that's happening in the industry, but it is hard to know that it was that one single catalyst that caused it to happen. It feeds into the other.
I don't think it ever is it?
No.
Yeah. And I'm not somebody who likes to claim things that,
We've seen that already. Too humble. We've seen that. We talk about that visibility and the importance of visibility. So just to move on, and there's lots I know that the Women's Sport Trust has done and achieved, but the Closing the Visibility Gap research and that project, again, what came out from that and what's available to the industry now?
We've done all sorts around visibility. We've got this strapline now that we want to make women's sport visible, viable and unstoppable. But we're doing a lot of monitoring work around how female athletes and women's sport are being made visible. The Closing the Visibility Gap also is very much it provides toolkits for the industry. Whether you're a rights holder, a brand, an athlete, how you can it gives an argument for creating more visibility, commercial argument, and then also the steps you need to take in order to improve the visibility, no matter which sort of part of the ecosystem you're in. Since that time, we've also, for the past year, been monitoring visibility, particularly around broadcast coverage, digital coverage, some newspaper coverage, and so forth, because we like to use that data as a catalyst to stimulate the industry. So on the back of that, we've been pulling together think tanks with media decision makers and also running public webinars, all about trying to stimulate people's thinking and pushing them to understand there is opportunity being missed. And at the moment, I think a big thing is understanding habit, understanding how we can understand women's sport audience more and how we can generate more habit. And we're doing a lot of deep diving into the data at the moment to see what nuggets we can pull out in order to help answer those sorts of questions.
I'd like to talk a little bit around the way in which female athletes are shown visually in the media too. And I know, we've done some work with Getty in the past, obviously I know, but it'd be interesting to know about that and I guess your thoughts on that visual portrayal of female athletes.
I think it's definitely changed from, over the past 10 years, because one thing that I was struck by as a female sports person was when London 2012 came on board, oh my gosh, there are people like me out there. I've been so used to the image of a woman being sort of 5'5", skinny, and not athletic, tall, strong, powerful, those sorts of words. And I think there is a different image being shown now. There still needs to be more diversity around, And that's really one thing that our Unlocked campaign, which is about bringing together female athletes to sort of supercharge their influence. A lot of it was about us trying to get beyond the usual voices that are out there, being seen, being heard. So our Unlocked campaign is a way in which trying to help the media, the industry to reflect society better by searching out amazing female athletes from a whole range of sports, a whole sort of a really diverse and inclusive group, and getting them to be seen and heard more.
And can I move on to the Unlocked campaign then? So in terms of the practicalities of how it works, what has it been operationally?
So Unlocked pulls together 30 to 40 female athletes, all who are operating at a incredible level. So we're talking world champions, Olympians. So that sort of very elite level brings together this diverse group. And we basically give them the space to think about what they care about. I'm often asked, what are you hoping to achieve out of Unlocked? And one of the key things is not to answer that question. Because the ambitions that they have and the successes that we've got out of the program, I could never have imagined. But if you give people the space to actually think about what their dreams are, think about what their ambitions are, what do you give a damn about, why, and then help them make the steps towards that ambition, often the what's achieved goes way beyond you could ever imagine. Yeah, so the Unlocked group pulls together this amazing group of women, and they're having very candid conversations about struggles, and we're also we've got a set almost program that we're putting them through to stimulate their thinking on things. We start to get an idea about who they are and what they need, and we start to run webinars with them for whatever it is they need, be that social media training, understanding the landscape, understanding about racism in sport, whatever it is that's appropriate. And we get that delivered by leaders within the industry. And then we match them with, we call them activators, but sort of like a mentoring relationship. So we match them with industry leaders that will open doors to them. Because often one thing that holds people back from getting ahead is who you know. And we have an incredible black book. So we get this amazing group of people. We open our black book to them and we sit back and we see what happens. And yes, incredible story. It's with such a high percentage of athletes from athlete alumni now on sporting boards. So if we're talking about trying to change the industry, change the face of the industry, Unlocked is definitely doing that. We had a big a lot of athletes in this past cohort that had an entrepreneurial edge to them. So started setting up organizations around policy change, around supporting athletes in mental health, all these sorts of organizations. Others that want to get ahead in the media and, have been commentators for the Paralympics or the Olympics or are moving sort of in that way. So lots of different things happening. I think the success of Unlocked is about relationships, building relationships with them as a group, them with WST, them with their activators or mentors as well. Anyone can run hangouts or webinars, but creating a relationship that really matters, that is really about trying to enable someone to fulfill their potential, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, connected, isn't it? The cross-sport connections. Yes. And I know that the athletes taking part in their third year are about to be announced, and I was lucky to get a sneak peek of the names this morning. And I am, again, just blown away by the diverse range of sportswomen and sports taking part. So I would be remiss not to say, I guess if people want to get involved in terms of being an activator, they can come to the Women's Sport Trust website and reach out. But also in terms of sponsors and partners and others from a funding perspective, as we mentioned earlier, I'm doing it on your behalf here, but to say do come and get in touch and have a conversation, because it's an amazing program and it could be even more amazing with additional funding.
Absolutely. There is so much opportunity with this athlete group to do more. And I'd love to work with a partner to get more impact both for them and for us.
Equal prize money is clearly getting lots of media attention right now, and you only have to look back at what Billie Jean King did for tennis to see the impact it can have for the long-term health and gender parity in sport. So I wonder how important you think prize money can be in driving change for women's sport.
I think increasing prize money is incredibly important. Prize money is demonstrates value, and we want to enable the sports ecosystem to actively demonstrate that it values women and girls. And prize money is one way that it does that. Whether we're at the right time to be having greater prize pots and things, it's a totally different question. We've got to make sure that what we're creating is sustainable as far as competitive advantage and so forth, and that the systems that are being created can also have enough funding and so forth, and professionalism and so forth to support that. So pay and prize money is one part of a bigger puzzle, and I think we've got to make sure that all those different things are being are in balance. But do I hope that prize money at some stage is going to be bigger and equal and so forth? Absolutely, because that demonstrates value. But whether we're at the right time in every sport is a different question.
How can we accelerate change? I guess as we as the Women's Sport Trust, but also we more broadly as fans of women's sport.
Go, watch it, celebrate it, read about it. And then I suppose more broadly, in whatever sphere you're in, notice if it's absent. If you're in a meeting, if you're putting a panel together, if you're doing anything at all, just notice if there are no women there or not. Notice if everybody in the room is white or not, and start pointing it out. What can we do? How can we change? Not pointing it out in a berating sort of way, because I don't think that changes. But yeah, notice what's happening.
Thanks so much to Tammy for joining me on The Game Changers. I'm incredibly proud to be a trustee for the Women's Sport Trust, and I know that with her at the helm, the charity will continue to drive change across the sector in the future. Do visit fearlesswomen.co.uk, where you can find out more about all of my incredible guests from this and the previous series. You can listen to all of the podcasts on the website and find out about the Women's Sport Collective, a free network for all women working in sport. You can sign up for Changing the Game, our weekly newsletter, which highlights the developments in women's sport, and there's more about my book, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport. Thanks once again to Sport England for backing the Game Changers through the National Lottery, and to Sam Walker, who does a great job as our executive producer, along with Rory Auskery on sound production. Finally, thank you to my brilliant colleague Kate Hannon, who does so much behind the scenes to make the podcast happen. Do come and say hello on social media, where you'll find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook at Sue Anstis. The Game Changers. Fearless women in sport.